Hi everyone, my name's Iona and I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. So the first thing I want to say is a massive welcome to everybody. This event, Creating Psychologically Informed Environments, is part of 16 days of action to end gender-based violence. Kent Integrated Domestic Abuse Service are hosting 16 events to inform, educate and inspire action so that we can make domestic abuse everybody's business. Because domestic abuse is everybody's business and everyone can make a difference, which is what you're doing by attending today, so thank you. During the event, you're able to use the Q&A text box on your screen to ask questions for Deb and Diane May, who is the Therapeutic Life Story Practitioner and Counsellor at Oasis. As moderator, I'll publish these and ask them at the end of the session. You can use the thumbs up just beneath the question to upvote that if that's something you'd like to do and if that's something you'd like an answer to. If you want to ask a follow-up question, please just put the words follow-up and I'll do my very best to link those together for you. Deb is going to be speaking for approximately 30 minutes and then we'll have about 30 minutes for questions. So I just wanted to note that in your email confirmation it shows the webinar is slightly longer, but that's just so we don't get cut off by the system. My last bit of housekeeping is to let you know that there is the new and improved domestic abuse website, which has popped up on your screen. So you can use this to find out more about local services. If you don't want to be seeing that right now, you can just use the little X in the corner of that and that'll minimise it. So the last thing I need to do is introduce Deb. Deb Cartwright has worked in the social sector for over 30 years. And has brought her mental health knowledge and experience into her work as Oasis CEO and has worked with the team on developing psychologically informed environments. So there you go, Deb, take it away.
Thank you. Hello everyone, lovely to be here with you. So just to add to that introduction, I'm not psychologically trained, so I'm not a mental health professional, but I have had that 30 years of experience in the work. So Oasis has been around for about 26 years and of course we work with domestic abuse, but there are many coexisting issues that we work with as a result of that domestic abuse. So we have the childhood trauma, the mental health issues and substance issues that can often go with the work that we do. Bessel van der Kolk calls trauma and the experience of an inescapable event, a stressful event that overwhelms our coping mechanisms. It's not the story of something that happened in the past, back then, it's the current imprint of that pain, horror and fear. And it's really important that we remember that when we're doing the work, and hopefully you've had some trauma-informed training, but psychologically informed environments, which I will refer to as PIEs from here on in so that I don't have to tongue twist all the time, they are about how we create places and spaces and relationships that allow those with traumatic experiences to function as well as they can and to learn about emotional regulation or to develop that, to learn to live through those experiences. Now, many of us will have had difficult experiences, traumatic experiences in our lives, and what we need to think about is how we can carry responses with us. For example, I had a high-speed car crash a few years ago, and now if I'm in a car and someone's driving too close to the car in front, if I'm not the driver, I get that feeling back of that moment when that crash happened. So we know that we carry it with us, we have it imprinted upon us. What we've done at Oasis is we've taken the concepts around psychologically informed environments and we've pulled the headings together as follows. We've looked at concepts around people and relationships. So this is everything from who we recruit, how we recruit them, what training, development and support we give them, and how they relate to and engage with those for whom they work. We also think about our places and spaces. Where do we work? What does it look like? How does it feel? What impact can that make on someone? And then we think about the psychological frameworks. So the thing that I love most about this way of thinking is that you're not working with a single methodology. You're not saying, I'm going to use this single evidence-based method of working with all people that I come across with trauma. What we do is we say we're going to think in multiple ways. We're going to use lots of different ways of being and seeing the world in order to help people. And I think that's really important. If you just think about, if you, for example, have a massage or do an exercise class, well, you might really like it and your friend might not. So actually what we understand is that we all bring our own experience to bear on things, and we relate differently to different people, to different ideas. So what psychological frameworks give us is a flexibility. They reduce the rigidity in how we do what we do. And finally, we've got organisational learning. If I had a fiver for every organisation or time I've heard we are a learning organisation when they're not, or, you know, whatever, I wouldn't be here today. I'd be sitting on the beach somewhere sunning myself. But I don't say this to be critical. I say it because I want us to say, prove it, when anyone says this. Show me how, and really to think about what that means. Okay, so let's dig into those a little bit. People and relationships. In a pie, staff focus on cultivating helpful relationships that are inclusive and compassionate. Sounds easy, right? Well, saying it out loud is easy. Doing it in practice creates magic. Ask yourself if you have ever witnessed someone or used them yourselves, these phrases. She doesn't help herself. He will always be like that. I can't do any more for them. They usually, they won't, they can't. Have you ever supervised or been a staff member who's been sworn at and has balked and wanted to use the project rules to create accountability around that? Do you think there could be other ways that we could look at and think about those things? There's so much in this aspect of people and relationships alone. What we need to think about is the fundamental communication, the values, the attitudes and the behaviours that we bring, because it's about a way of being, really, rather than a way of doing, that create a pie. This means recruiting staff who are resilient to the different ways that people might present, who understand their own responses and reactions to different behaviours, who can handle conflict or the perception of conflict, who can stay with adult behaviours, encourage them in others, and who can create boundaries without becoming rigid and inflexible. Think about how rules-based your system is. Must people conform to your rules? How many of those rules are just plain necessary for safety, as some are? And how many of them are laden with your values or are just about making your project's life easier? Are they rules, or is it a bill of rights and responsibilities? I think what would be great is if you could pop some examples of the types of rules we come across in our work, pop them into the chat and we could explore them in the Q&A. Our relationships are also about the relationships between those that use our services, and we should think about how we encourage those, how we grow those, how we increase the empathy and connection between those we work for. Do we really focus on the choices and opportunities for control that those we work for can have? Let's dig into that word a little bit, that concept of choice. What is a choice? Is it a choice to keep going back to someone who does you harm? Is it a choice to believe them? Is it a choice to live somewhere unclean and unsafe when you've been offered somewhere that we, the professionals, would deem appropriate? In terms of our thinking, we might question the value judgment that the word choice carries in these circumstances. In terms of pie thinking, when we label someone as having made a choice, what we might actually be saying is, they have what they wanted. What can I do to help? I worked with someone many years ago who had very severe and enduring mental health problems, lived with active, quite florid psychosis. And he was offered a beautiful flat in Covent Garden and went to great lengths and ended up actually having a relapse because he didn't want to live there. So actually what I was contending with as the support worker was trying to generate the understanding in others that, yeah, flat in Covent Garden is cool, but, you know, this is not this person's priority. He doesn't want to live on his own. He likes living in the resettlement project. He doesn't care how rundown it is and how many problems you get in there. He feels better about there being people around. So actually what he's doing is he's putting his priorities in place and we're putting ours, and we need to take ours out of the mix sometimes and really think about where someone else is at. Choices are expanded or restricted by our sense of agency, and I think our sense of agency is a much more important frame of reference when we come to think about choices. So we have choices. There are multiple options for us. There are loads of things we can choose to do or not to do. There are choices that people aren't necessarily aware of, and maybe we're going to come along and we're going to make that choice. Then we're going to make them aware of it. But agency is your capacity to make choices. And this will be limited potentially by social structures, by your gender, by race, by age, by sexuality, religion, your ability, your social class, your mental health. You have an internalized sense of your own agency that can be impacted by multiple things. So someone with a lower sense of agency just might not feel that an option is viable for them, or that they're not worthy enough for that option, or they may not be comfortable with that option because it's outside their experience. A person with a high sense of agency might be aware of all their options and feel worthy enough to choose. They may have a broad range of experiences. They might be comfortable with change. Choice is all about the options on the menu. You know, we come along as a waiter and we say, there you are, here are all the options of all the things that you can do. The problem is the person choosing from that menu is going to be restricted by what food they like, how much money they've got in their pocket, what society tells them about their body and how they should look, what they grew up eating. What is the sense of agency that your clients have about the menu on offer? What can you do to increase that for them? What small steps along the way? Think about strengths. Do we have a strengths focus when it comes to the people and relationships work that we do? Do we say we have a strength focus and then hone in on all the problems? Or do we truly look at our clients and say, wow, you are surviving something I do not believe I could tolerate? When I flipped the situation with my former client on its head, I could see that he was struggling so hard every day to cope and live with his mental health needs that it was really obvious why that flat in Covent Garden wouldn't be appropriate for him, and he would balk at that idea. We need to think about how we recruit, support and develop staff to be the type of people that can create a pie. So I'm picking out some specifics here. I mean, this is a much broader topic than half an hour, so forgive me for pinging through. How many of you have been trained to sit yourself by the door in client meetings for a quick exit, if need be? If all of you haven't put your hands up, I would be surprised. So when we do that, if I did that, if I sat by the door and my client sees me between them and a safe exit, what could that do? When we sit in a room for a one-to-one with someone, do we give them the heads up that the project is filled with weighty fire doors that slam, could make them jump a lot? Do we create safe and separate spaces for women, or does everyone get lumped together? Do we understand why that is so very important? Is our space full of signs and rules and instructions? Is it very institutional? Environment design is key in PI settings. In the absence of expensive redesigns, we can think about some of the basics. So noise, for example. I grew up with some difficulties, and I was, and still am actually, a bit noise sensitive. In a stressful situation as a teenager, noise could tip me over the edge. We might also think about the lighting and how comfortable the environment is. What's the temperature? What fabrics are we using? What colours? What art? What plants? I mean, think about what you value in your own home. You want your home to be a safe and nourishing space. In my example of myself, I was lucky enough to have naturally trauma-informed teachers. I would get invited to sit in my head of year's office, which was comfortable, had plants, it was lamplit. He wouldn't try and discuss things with me, just let me sit. Maybe the next day we would talk. I mean, he did hold me to account, but he didn't try and do it while I was upset. I look back now and realise that that man taught me to sit with my own feelings. He knew that immediate attempts to rationalise with me would not be filtered through my rational brain because I was overwhelmed. He was an absolute hero. He knew I didn't need advice, I just needed acceptance. He taught me that he was not going to beat me with his rules at that time because I was pretty good at doing that to myself. He had a high degree of tolerance for my behaviour. He saw beneath emotion to pain. How can you use all of these practical ideas to create environments that support people's ability to emotionally regulate? The other thing that's led me to a personal disclosure, when I was writing this, I was thinking this is something about the concept of us and them as well. A psychologically informed environment is one of we. We as human beings. We as there but for the grace of whatever go I. We as in I'm here to help, not control. And we as in you are my equal in humanity. Think about your places and spaces. Think about the impact they have and whether they create a sense of psychological safety. So the other thing is the psychological frameworks, and there's no time to go into these, but we work with people very often with multiple disadvantages, complex trauma. It makes our setup and delivery even more important. And it makes us, I often say to people if I do trauma training is if I could struggle as I have and I don't have complex trauma in my life, how on earth do we expect people who do have that level of need to just shift and become something different? The good thing about psychologically informed environments is that I think because we can bring so much thinking into it, we've got the wonderful work of Bessel van der Kolk. We can look at social learning theory and how people learn through their environments to be. We can use humanistic approaches. We can just bring so many different ways of seeing the world. It is fundamentally the avoidance of rigid containers and the understanding that rigidity causes resistance. Remember that we're working with the inescapable. So let's take a really simple example of how practice can be unhelpful. Our frameworks for support must contain a recognition of the ways in which trauma-based responses can be activated. We can't avoid them all and shouldn't, but we can be aware of the obvious ones and our own tendency to become routine about language and ways of doing things. We need to be really good at observing and seeing what is going on for someone, those non-verbal cues that we can have. And we've got a fundamental problem with one of our key DA tools, the DASH assessment. DASH Train the Trainer takes the theory of the DASH and teaches why it's so very important that we use it to manage risk, but it doesn't pay attention to how we use it. Now, it trains lots and lots of people. There are lots and lots of people using it, out there, asking questions that when you think about them are deeply intrusive. And we have to be mindful of how we become desensitised to that, to those questions, to the content of them and what they can do to us. For example, are you very frightened? Fear is one of the most fundamental human emotions. We all have fear. We fear aging, dying, losing our looks, our youth, our children struggling, being poor, not being good enough. Most of the fears we have, we don't even recognise as fear. We use beauty cream, we exercise, we have surgery, we push for the best for our children, we compete with one another. And these are fears that are about nebulous things that are out there that happen over time. When we are someone who's experiencing domestic abuse, and by that I mean coercive and controlling behaviour, someone who's entrapped, we invite them to feel just how frightened they are in a real and present experience. We invite them to acknowledge something that they may well try to parcel up and keep somewhere else. Have they ever used weapons or objects to hurt you? Boom. Flashback. Have they ever attempted to strangle, choke, suffocate, or drown you? Boom. Do they do or say things of a sexual nature that makes you feel bad or that physically hurt you or someone else? Boom. Flashback. Shame. In 4 questions, you've created the opportunity for someone to revisit some of the most horrible and horrifying experiences of their lives and brought up potentially a torrent of shame, because we need to fill out a form. So ask yourself, how do we do that? What happens if I'm having a bad day? What happens if I've done 10 of these today? What happens when my caseload's too high? I'm on the hamster wheel of assessments. What happens when it becomes about me and not them? How much support do I get with the difficulties of this work? How much support do I get that keeps my compassion firmly in place? And then ask yourself this: how easy would I find it to answer these questions? When I told you about me, how many of you cringed a little bit? How many of you were a bit uncomfortable that I shared? Well, that discomfort is shame. And the people we work for have it in spades. I'm not ashamed anymore. I don't feel bad. I've got no qualms in sharing, but that took me many, many years. If you'd asked me questions like these when I was a teenager, I'd have been gripped by shame so deep that I probably would, well, I definitely would never have spoken to you again. I would have actively disliked you. So ask yourself again, discuss it in your teens. How do we handle such obvious triggers as these? How do you handle the resulting responses? Do you call them resistant, non-engagers? Do you call them hostile? I'm not saying that you can't or shouldn't have boundaries, by the way, but how do you present the boundaries? How do you allow for flexibility within those containers that we have to have? Do you ask people what they need and how they want you to be? Do you know what to do when this comes up, when someone freezes or wants to run or wants to fight you because of what's come up within them? Don't avoid. Go mindfully into your interactions. Don't be afraid of a response coming up, but know how you're going to sit with it. How skilled are you at managing conversations, at conflict, at active listening? How self-aware are you in reflecting on what happened and where? How present are you when someone is speaking? How much of their non-verbal cueing do you pick up? How do you create rapport with clients? Finally is organisational learning. This is not just about looking at what went well and didn't. It also includes questioning our own assumptions. We talk a lot about our curiosity and our reflection, and we have to really know and understand what that means. Are we able to sit and look, for example, when things don't go well, at how we have handled that, at what has happened for that other person? Are there any flexibilities we can make in the way we operate? What are our assumptions? Does our organisation carry our values all the way through from top to bottom, left to right? Organisational learning deepens our understanding and creates more flexible systems. Organisational learning takes the concept of the client being hard to reach and truly turns it into the organisation becoming more accessible. Now, we can't make ourselves just completely accessible. That's never going to be possible, and we can't change the world and, you know, everybody in it. There will always be things that don't work out, but we can deepen our understanding of how our culture organisationally creates inaccessibility. We learn to know if we're able to start where someone else is at. And someone has to climb the ladder for change and growth. And they may have to start with feeling safe. They may have to move on to stabilising emotionally. When we say to someone, you're safe now, your only task is not to go back, do we really understand that they may not feel safe for quite some time to come or ever? Do we know how complex that task is for them? Do we really get that person's sense of agency over their own life? Do we appreciate the need that they may have for that other? Do we respect where that comes from and how it could happen to anyone under the right circumstances? Do we know what it's like to set out in the world without emotional stability and alone? We can then think about how we help people to connect and receive, how they grow through their journey. We use our reflection and problem solving collaboratively with them and hopefully expand that sense of agency and help them to move to take actions that were previously unknown or inaccessible. Very often our services are set up straight to jump in at action. We want to go way in at the top. And if we jump to action when someone is fundamentally unsafe or unregulated, what are we going to achieve? There's a chance that what we'll achieve is a reinforcement of their sense of hopelessness, of nothing can change if I'm not good enough to achieve this, of the decision to go back or stay put. And finally, this is the ultimate outcome for me of being that psychologically informed person. This was the feedback given to an IDVA at the end of support. The client said, when you need me but do not want me, then I must stay. When you want me but no longer need me, then I have to go. You're just like Nanny McPhee. This made me think of the concept of calm abiding in Buddhist philosophy, which is about us potentially. I'm no expert, but it's about calmly sticking with those who push us away, being there until they don't need us anymore. And I'd just like to publicly say, well done, Sammy, because that's the best we can hope for. What great feedback. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful, Deb. I feel like I've learned so much.
Thank you.
And we've been doing PI audits together for a little while, and I still feel like I got absolutely tons from that.
Thank you.
We've just been joined by Diane. Hi, Diane.
Hi.
So our first question is from Heidi. So this is about one of the rules that they've got. So we have a rule whereby if there is an increase in the dash RIC, that they would have to stop working with that domestic abuse practitioner, and they might have been working with that practitioner for quite a long time, and have to start working with an IDVA. So they very often lose that sort of person connection due to that.
Oh, it's such a good question, isn't it? Such a good point. It's really difficult because different organisations are set up in different ways, and I will often say to people that it should be okay to move between workers. We should set it up so that clients feel okay about that and don't feel unhealthily attached to us. But by the same token, there may be times when combined working or keeping someone as the lead is actually really beneficial for that client. Diane, what would you say about that?
I think it's about making sure that the client is informed and that there's a purpose and there's a task to doing that, and ensuring that it's done in a safe way and consensually where possible, but that's about risk, and actually there's a purpose to it, and the purpose is that this is about keeping you safe. Yeah. And that's key. Safety is key. Absolutely. And unfortunately your safety is paramount. Your safety is paramount, and that's because that's to do with care and compassion, actually.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because in the slides I said, you know, it's just to fill out a form, and that isn't to say that the risk assessment is not important. It's a hugely valuable thing, an important thing to do, but it's about thinking about the when and the where and the how and the why that we do things, rather than saying that certain tools are not to be used, because they absolutely should.
So this one from Adam, I think, really sort of follows on quite nicely. So they have a no perpetrator rule, which could be quite subjective, for which they use a convictions, cautions, warnings, reprimands for abuse, assault or harassment rule. And that can be quite upsetting for people who have a common assault conviction from maybe 20 years ago when they were 18. And he says it's really hard to use these black and white rules when humans are so varied.
Well, I'm going to put myself out there and say black and white, hard and fast rules aren't pie. You know, it's really difficult, because I remember someone saying to me years ago, oh, you know, by being flexible around that rule, you're not going to set a precedent. Well, yeah, you know what, you are going to get challenged sometimes, but also there are times when you need to be flexible. You know, imagine we had a black and white rule that you could never employ someone in the social sector who had any form of criminal conviction. That's not going to work, right? So I think that you should be able to take measured risks and have faith in people. What do you think, Di? Do you agree?
Yeah, I think, you know, this is about people's life experiences, and there are some agencies that will only employ people that have got said life experiences, because those life experiences, once we are able to have some support and learn from those and go forward, make some workers absolutely incredible. And if we're going to deny support services to people who in the past have perpetrated certain behaviours, then potentially, as Deb said, you know, that's not being psychologically informed, because potentially, fundamentally, if we don't believe that there is the capacity to change, that's quite harsh, because people do have the capacity to change. As a therapist, I wouldn't be a therapist if I didn't believe that people had the capacity to change. We should always say that everybody has got the capacity to change, because people do have.
Yeah, definitely. And I didn't get the term in on the presentation, but that's about believing in post-traumatic growth, isn't it?
Great. So there's another rule that's coming from Adam, which is about having a public place rule, so that staff are never alone meeting clients. They must always be in a public space.
That's an interesting one. Does that mean, I'm wondering if that means in a public space that affords no privacy to the client? Because I think privacy, and I'm guessing here, but, you know, if I speak around it, privacy is incredibly important. You have to give people the dignity they deserve. Presumably you're asking them to talk about their lives, or you might want to give them an opportunity to say what's gone on for them this week, or what awful thing has happened, or, you know, there can be so much, can't there, in a key work setting. So Public places are good, but not suitable for every conversation. So it really does depend on the type of conversation that's happening.
So one that's come in from Leanne is that they have a no hot drink rule, as they've got families with children in the centre. But she feels like it creates a non-welcoming environment and also stops them from creating relationship that's not seen as sort of worker and client. And so she's been on a bit of a mission to find a way around this and have a less formal approach to introducing themselves to families.
Oh, I feel like I'm on sticky ground here. Actually, I think it's interesting because one of the things that we do have to have are those containers and boundaries. So when I said that, it's because we must have rules around. I'm not saying that we're going to suddenly ask our staff to tolerate being hit or, you know, breaching health and safety regulations or employment law or any of those things. We do have to have those containers and boundaries, and potentially it may be that the risk of a child getting a hot drink spilt on it is too great. That may well be the case. And there's a health and safety assessment that has to be made there, whether we like that or not. Or there might be spaces in the centre where that could be more flexible, you know, or there might be other solutions, like could we have a fridge full of juices so that we can share a juice together or something like that, you know, other ways that we can make this slightly more social and welcoming.
So one from Philippa is about what alternatives could we use to the DASH risk assessment?
I don't think we should. I think we should use the DASH risk assessment. I think in the presentation, my point was really about, do we become desensitised and just start filling out a form and forget that those questions are deeply intrusive and can remind people of things that they may well have parcelled up and not want to think about. So absolutely do not stop using the DASH risk assessment. That wasn't my intention. DASH risk assessment keeps people safe and helps us to plan and help them. And it's also not bad, so, you know, for people to have an awareness that maybe what they're going through isn't okay, and sometimes the DASH can achieve that. Di?
Well, I think it's about, with that awareness when we're going through a DASH with somebody, I think it's about listening to the subtle cues that are going on while going through that DASH. If that's being completed over a telephone and then there is an element of silence, or you can kind of feel, and that sounds strange, but actually if you can feel internally yourself that there is some kind of a distance going on, then maybe that client at the other end has dissociated and gone to a place of frozen. And actually it's about trying to encourage that client to have some kind of movement. So trying to encourage them to move their legs. If they're sitting down, try to encourage them to move, you know, lift one knee to the other, or tap one hand to the other, one hand from one place to the other, because you're trying to encourage bilateral movement. So that's creating a change in their brain. So it's about trying to encourage the client to come out of that frozen place. If they're talking quite frantically and they're getting very fast in their speech, then potentially they're becoming quite hypervigilant, and you should be able to hear that in their tones and in their language. So it's about being trauma informed and understanding the flight, fight, fleet, freeze responses, and being in tune with your client as much as you can. And that sometimes is really difficult when that's your first ever telephone conversation with a client if you're an IDFA, or it's your first ever meeting with a client if you're face to face. But it's about trying as best as you can to tune into your client, whether that is face to face or whether that is over the telephone, and where possible, regulating the client as much as you possibly can. But again, as Deb said, don't avoid doing the DASH. The DASH needs doing. But if you sense something, if you can sense or feel something, the chances are they're having a trauma response, and try your best to bring them out of that. And a lot of the time that is about steady, rhythmic kind of tone. That is about trying to encourage movement, because movement and rhythmic tones will help a client to come out of that traumatised place.
Awesome, that's brilliant.
Thank you. And Ros has said, I was just going to jump in, Ros has said in the chat, I'll publish it, that preparing the space and time to complete a dash, as well as the time for emotional care once completed, is important. And that's exactly it, isn't it? We don't avoid all of the boundaries and the tools that we have to use. We can question and say, why is this still right? But we prepare properly, and as you said, Di, we be there. Yeah.
So we've got an idea from Adam. So he's saying that have you ever mystery shopped your own service? That's something that they did recently, along with some role play for the senior management team. And afterwards, they halved the number of questions that they asked at registration.
That's a really good point, and it has actually crossed my mind, but we haven't actually done it yet.
I know, I think that's on the list now.
Yes.
So Paula, they had a similar rule to Heidi's, that when the risk lessens for the dash, the client gets referred to the outreach team. And again, that being a shame, that often, you know, they've built up a really good relationship, and that continuity of support can get lost.
It's a difficult one, I think, and I think I'm going to put it out there. I'm not going to say this is you and why you've asked the question, by the way, but I'm going to put it out there that we get attached to our clients as well, and it can be really difficult to let them go. I mean, I've totally been in that place, but it's also about thinking around how we pre-frame, set up the expectations around how this is going to work, and you know, if we set someone out to understand that there may be more than one of us working with you, but we'll make that a safe and okay transition, it can be really healthy. I'm going to let Di tell you how, because she is the expert on talking about that.
So, you know, in this kind of transitioning, I think it's about, if that is the way that your service is working, your client is going to know that from the offset. You know, the thing that is so key in our work with all of our clients is the beginning, the middle and the ending. And actually, if they know from the beginning, if we are clear from the offset that actually this is the way this agency works, when your risk starts to go down, you transition into support from the outreach service, then actually that, although that might be quite sad for a client that they're being handed over to another worker, it's also part of that process, and the client themselves will know that they're progressing through service, and in so many ways that can be beneficial for a client. For a lot of people, endings might have been quite traumatic. If it's domestic abuse, it will have been traumatic. Potentially their ending of that might have been quite traumatic. We know that risk increases at the end of an abusive relationship, and actually the ending of your support work with your individual client can show them a healthy ending, what a healthy ending to a relationship is like. So we, as the practitioner, might struggle with endings as well, and a lot of this can sometimes be our stuff rather than their stuff. As Deb said, we become attached to our clients. But if we can complete that work with our clients and make it a healthy ending to a healthy relationship, that is such a magnificent gift that we're giving to our clients, such a magnificent gift, that if they can take that away and be passed over to the next worker, what an amazing thing. What an amazing thing we're giving to somebody. It's an incredible, incredible gift. Because they've had a healthy relationship, a healthy attachment, a healthy relationship. That is absolutely amazing. We couldn't give them anything better.
Well said, that woman.
So maybe a reflection on this rule from James. So they have a rule where there's 2 officers that have to go to a client's property. And James always phones the client to check first whether they're happy that 2 officers will attend, and if they feel more comfortable if they want female or male officers to attend.
Like it.
Mm.
I like it. Check it out. People feel valued, right?
Mm.
I'm coming to your home.
And from Ms Mailer, employing ex-clients to be frontline staff, do you think that's a PI action?
I don't think we should be differentiating clients and staff to that extent. Personally, you know, there are all sorts of people in the world who use services, and if they turn out to be great employees, then too right, we should have them working in our organisations.
So from Heidi, the service also insists that someone calls the helpline, that they all have to complete a dash, even if they just need maybe the name of a solicitor who accepts legal aid. So it's very process and procedure focused.
Yeah, which is a difficulty, isn't it? Because actually what we're working with in domestic abuse are people coming to significant harm. And actually there is a lot of process around that in terms of trying to prevent or reduce the risk of those significant harms. It's about the way of being, the way of doing it that is, for me, the issue. I don't think we should be removing the safety scaffold, as it were. I think that what we should be doing is being attentive to the how we do it. And I did see that someone put in the chat about how do you create that space for a dash assessment on the phone. And that's a really good question and ties in with this one. Well, you create it by using the skills for rapport, you know, your tone of voice and the way you lead into things. You tell people that some of the questions I'm going to ask you are intrusive. And, you know, let's take our time. You tell me what you need. You tell people what to expect rather than just launching in process. Process can be difficult, but it is, for me, it's about how you do it, not what you're doing. If you're just focusing on what you have to do, then chances are that's not going to work out. But if you start with a focus on how, then it's probably going to go much better. And creating space also means creating a bit of space for yourself. So do you have that couple of minutes before each call where you centre yourself? Do you know how to ground yourself? Do you know when you're on the hamster wheel tripping through the calls? Do you get up and walk about a little bit? Take a few deep breaths. Think about who you're about to talk to. You know, they're all good techniques, I think, whether you're seeing someone or speaking on the phone.
So we've got from Julie a rule about recharging the financial cost of a lock change to the front door for residents in a low income when they've been victims of domestic abuse and want to lock out a perpetrator.
That's an interesting one. Well, far be it from us to say that any organisation's practices are right or wrong. That's not the point of this. I suppose what that brings up for me in client terms is how's the client going to feel about that? You know, often what we're working with where someone is living with that sort of abuse and issue is that sense of injustice. You know, that sense of this is happening to me and being done to me and I'm out of control and maybe I'm being held responsible for someone else's behaviour. So I think, you know, there's an advocacy piece of work that we can think about in terms of who's responsible and is the right person being held responsible, actually.
So a really interesting one from Rebecca. So in children's social work, it's so difficult to create a safe space as we invade people's homes. We're focused on the child, and rightly so, but we're often a terrifying agency.
Yeah, that's true. And I suppose we've got to maybe reframe some of our language. So don't see yourself as invading someone's home. Try to see yourself doing something that you believe in that could be helpful for the family. Try to present yourself in that way as well, because the reality is you can't change your statutory duty and function, and your statutory duty and function is there for a reason. But you can think about how you present yourself compassionately to that person. Irrespective of whether we're telling someone bad news, I've evicted people from refuges and other accommodation settings compassionately. The reality is you're not avoiding doing what you have to do, but you can still do it with compassion. I don't know if you want to add to that, Di.
I think it's such a hard one, isn't it? It's almost about the point of entry into that person's world, isn't it? Because of the stereotypes. So I guess it's, how do you challenge those stereotypes when you're going into the world, somebody's world and somebody's home, where they are scared? I guess it's that trauma definition again, isn't it, of inescapability. And for a family, oh my goodness me, social services are here and they're going to take my child away. Or for the child also, if you don't behave, you're going to get taken away. So there is a lot of fear with social services, and I guess it's about demystifying that fear and those misconceptions, and maybe coming at it from that angle, from a different angle from the offset. And that's really difficult when you've got that referral in front of you that you've got no choice but to investigate. But maybe going in from a different angle from the offset. Yes, you've got that piece of work to do, but there's different outcomes that come from that piece of work, and how can you go in from a different angle from the start? Because that's not the role of social services. They're not there for the task of kind of breaking down families. They're there to reinforce the foundations and build a family back up again. And that is the role.
And the fundamental basis of that is the relationship, isn't it?
Yeah.
When we think about pies being about people and relationships, we all know that the best work we ever do is going to come out of a relationship that we form with someone. And it doesn't really matter what our function is. If we've managed the expectations, and as Di said, we demystify and people know what our function is, we still got the opportunity to focus on a strong relationship, building trust. And that's a big thing. We come to it with an understanding that there may be a fundamental lack of trust, and it's for me to be able to create that relationship where trust can grow.
And I suppose that the other thing that I'd add in is that, I know that under child protection there would be certain actions that people obviously have to comply with. If not, these things will happen and there will be actions. But actually, as Deb said from the start of her presentation, the element of choice, there is always an element of choice. If somebody doesn't comply, there may be further actions. But if we're going into a relationship from the start of and putting that element of choice there, it's far better. We know from freedom programs, if somebody is told to attend, it doesn't work so well. If somebody is given the option to attend and the freedom, it's back to the legal definitions, the freedom, the capacity and the choice. It works far better. So actually, if we go in maybe as a social worker and saying, yes, I'm here, it's compulsory, but actually these are the choices you've got, then maybe we're going to have a better outcome, is what I would say. More psychologically informed environment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've got a question from Karen. So they're thinking about putting in a practice at the moment where there's a rule that if you haven't had the training in completing a dash, you shouldn't complete it. However, her view is that if you've got the one chance, maybe at 3 a.m. in A&E, to complete it, then you should take the chance, because that might be, you know, your only chance from a safeguarding point of view. Because at the end of the day, that gives the nurse a chance of assessing if they should be admitted or not. Have you got any thoughts?
I think, oh dear, I'm in the realm of personal opinion now. Didn't think about this in advance. My personal belief, and it's my personal opinion, not a fact, is that if you are someone who is trained in safeguarding and knows how to undertake safeguarding and is capable of reading the tool and understanding the tool, then you should be able to ask the questions. The training itself would be around, because it is just a tick list, right? So the issue is that you need training around understanding domestic abuse and the dynamics thereof, because it may be that it's about your professional judgment, and professional judgment is incredibly important in the DASH assessment. There isn't a tick box for professional judgment, it's a knowledge-based thing. So training is incredibly important, and I understand why that policy rule is there. Having said that, if you have one opportunity at 3 o'clock in the morning and you know the content of the DASH, it is possible, if you establish rapport with someone, to have a conversation that might tell you, I think this person is at high risk, in which case you should act on it, because we shouldn't be stopped by a tick list from taking further action if we think someone is at risk of harm.
So a question from Helen about maybe how you prepare a client for the DASH and create a safe space when you're over the phone and maybe more virtually. So we're no longer going into people's homes as often. So how do we create that virtual space?
I think I spoke to that a little bit. I don't know if Di's got any thoughts on it. Yeah, I mean, I was saying about the establishing rapport you can do on the phone as you can in a room, but not quite as easily sometimes. It is about your tone of voice. It is about grounding yourself and coming into that conversation and being attentive. It is about expressing interest in someone's concerns and letting them, for me personally, I like to let someone have their story so that they get a chance to just tell me their story if they wish to, not me picking at them, but if they need to just talk for a little while, I'll let them do that. You show empathy, you don't rush. But that doesn't mean you have to spend a couple of hours on the phone. You know, it's okay to put limits on things as well. Di, have you got anything you want to add to that?
Not really. I think it's about, you know, as you said, kind of laying the foundations for that call and being open and honest with that's the task. You know, you're completing a risk assessment and being open and honest with what you're going to do with that risk assessment, because that's key as well. It would be awful to complete a DASH and then go off and put a referral in without letting somebody know that that's what you're going to do. And making sure that you are picking up the silences of what is not said as well, because it's, as Deb said, this is about professional judgment as well. So it's what is not said as well as what is said. And that's the thing. If you're sitting with somebody, you are able to pick up a lot more about their body language than you would be able to pick up on the phone. But on the phone, you can pick up on the silences. You can pick up on the change in their tone. You can pick up a level of resistance that maybe would be coming through in their voice. And it's about making sure that you pick up on all of those things. It's about making sure that you're a little bit creative with the questions. DASH questions are actually closed questions. They're yes and no questions. Most of them are closed questions, so it's yes, no. It doesn't allow for expansion. So actually there is making sure that you are being creative in those questions. You know, has anything ever happened of a sexual nature that made you feel uncomfortable? Well, actually, it's a yes/no question. So sometimes you have to be creative in asking it in a slightly different way, but making sure that you're still stuck to that questions as much as you possibly can. So that's what I would say. Be creative.
Yeah. And someone just put in the chat quite rightly, Jennifer, I think was the name, that, you know, you also check first off, has someone got the space and the time to talk? You know, we don't dive in when actually someone might be in the middle of cooking dinner with a baby under one arm. We just ask those, you know, is it okay? Have you got time? Have you got somewhere you can sit quietly? And, you know, those sorts of things are really important.
Fantastic. Well, that brings us all the way to 3 o'clock. I have absolutely learned so much from that, and I think I'm going to be going away thinking about it. So thank you for everyone who's asked a question, because I think those conversations have really added to it as well. There is going to be a recording of this webinar, which is going to be made available to you shortly. There is still time to register for some more events, so we're going up until next Friday, so there's more events to register for if you would like to. So that's at daeverybodiesbusiness.org to register for those. We can also keep the conversation going with the hashtag #DAEverybodiesBusiness and #NoC-Speak-Out. And just make sure that if the talk today has raised anything for you personally and you'd like to find out more about services that are available, please do visit that website that popped up at the beginning of the session, which is domesticabuseservices.org.uk, where you can find out more about how to refer into local services.